In 2025, we've seen an explosion of product companies leveraging community to help fuel their growth. And I think one of the companies that's done this best has got to be Lovable. I got a chance to sit down and chat with Brenton Andersen, who helped grow Lovable's community to over 140,000 members this year. We got to talk about what it was like being part of Lovable during this crazy period of hypergrowth that they've just been through. We got talked about how product companies can leverage community themselves. We even talked about our outlook on the EU startup ecosystem and what we think it's going to look like going forward, and much more. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Let's jump in. All right. Hi, Brendan. Thanks again for doing this. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about what's been all things community at Lovable and what you're up to now. I'm really curious to jump into this, but maybe we can kick off with a little intro into who you are and what you've been up to for those who are watching.
Sure. David, thanks for having me. So yes, hi everyone, my name's Brenton. I joined Lovable earlier this year in May officially, but I was part of the Lovable journey a little bit earlier on by being active in the community. And that's how I got involved. I was just someone who enjoyed the product and needed a place to discuss that product, get some help, and found this online forum. It was quite small. Maybe 1,000 people were using it. It was sort of quiet and dead, but I needed somewhere to just sort of get some help. I ended up leading that forum, growing it to about 20,000 people, and then getting invited to help out with an event. Next thing you know, I was employed by Lovable. That event that I was originally involved with was a 6-week boot camp for about 6,000 founders. Originally, I was told, come join us. It'll be fun. 10 hours a week, just volunteer. And like straight away, it was 60 hours. So I was working my 9 to 5 at the time. My background is in government, mostly in project management and analyst type roles. Yes, I was doing my 9 to 5, going home, sleeping, whatever I could get. Maybe it was 6 to 10 at best. Quite often it wasn't. And then waking up and working through the night and then going to my 9 to 5 again. I did that for probably 3 or 4 months straight. That is not the life of all startups, I should say. But Lovable is about 95% of it is based in Sweden. And the 5% that isn't is mostly the marketing team. I would have been working with in those early days. They were based in the US. Quite a long window here. I'm in Australia for those that can't hear the accent. I'm usually coming online about 4 p.m. is Stockholm for where I am. And then San Francisco is about midnight. So quite a long working day there. I came on board with Lovable and was in the community team. I was doing events, partnerships, managing the community platforms, a wide variety of some sort of growth things, the things that fall through the cracks of startups down to the community team. And when I came on board, the community was about 50,000 roughly. And by the time I left, it was about 140,000. So I was there for about 7 months during that period of growth.
Yeah, it's actually one of the largest for at least on Discord. And from what I could see, it was one of the largest dedicated AI communities. Like it's bigger than Anthropic's, for example, which I was pretty impressed by. So yeah, good job you, good job Lovable for that. But yeah, I think OpenAI is the only one I saw that had a demonstrably larger online community. But I thought what was really interesting about Lovable is the volume of physical events they're doing, or dedicated events as well. That really seems to be a differentiator. How much of the physical events and the sort of or the scheduled events were you a part of?
Yeah, Lovable itself doesn't run too many events.
Mm-hmm.
They're quite a small team. They're probably one of the thinnest organizations that are out there. Certainly, I believe at the time I left, it might have been around 120 to 150 employees, 600,000 customers, active customers, I should say. It's very thin, doesn't have the resources to facilitate many events themselves. But when they do events, they're usually quite large scale. As I said, the event I came on board for was 6,000 founders for one event. So I'd probably say during the 7 months, we probably did maybe 4 or 5 large scale events. But most of the events that happen are actually run by the community itself. So Lovable receives anywhere from usually about, I think, 50 to 100 event requests every day. So these are people who want sponsorship in credits or some sort of assistance in some way, co-marketing, whatever it might be. I would say that we probably get the opportunity to support and facilitate somewhere around about 300 to 400 a month. But again, they're mostly the community run themselves. But there's lots of events that are happening that we don't know about as well. That don't need support or sponsorship. Yeah, so it's quite a lot. The community is very active, and it's interesting when you said about how large the community is, and it sort of catches people off guard. To me, the most important thing about a community, the first step is all about identity, right, and sense of belonging. Whether you're talking about like a local football club that you feel that you could represent that brand, that club is your home city, and whatever it is, right? You have a strong identity with it. Lovable as a brand is just something that people automatically feel an identity with, even though there's not, it hasn't got a long history. It's a brand, fairly new company in the sense of the world. There's this instant, no one is going to say, no, I don't like the word lovable, right? So that's one of
Very
the things I
relatable.
think is very relatable. Really makes that community sell itself and grow by itself. I mean, there's lots of other things that go into growing a community. I'm sure we'll touch on some of that, but that first one is just such an easy one for why Lovable excels in its community.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's pretty clear that there's like a strong brand around Lovable, but it's like quite community driven, quite founder led as well. But I think just the word lovable, like you said, it really captures the imagination, right? And making lovable products. I think it really helps. And I think that what strikes me about Lovable and the community around it the most is like it's how it's very diverse. So like I found with a lot of the other AI communities that they're like either like very technical or not very technical at all, but actually like there's like quite a diverse mix in the Lovable communities. Like in a Lovable community, like was that like an intentional thing that you sort of aimed for? Or what did it happen organically? Hey, dog.
You can see my puppy in the background.
Special guest.
Look, the product, you have to understand the history of the product, I think. Lovable itself, a lot of people talk about the $200 million ARR in 12 months and so on. But they also forget the history of where Lovable came from. So originally, it was a product called GPT Engineer. It was this quite technical tool. It was really a niche product for developers to make their job easier. You still have to have all technical knowledge. I wouldn't have been able to pick it up and use it, right? And they built this original community of people using it on GitHub, and it was a very niche product there, and then that was then expanded to be something that everyone could use and rebranded as this new product, right? So it's really at its core still meant to be a tool that developers can use. And certainly the long-term vision is that developers will use it in enterprise production apps. That's definitely the long-term vision. It's not quite there at that point just yet. AI is very, very close to being able to do that, but as a whole probably isn't. But yes, it's certainly got to cater to everyone while still having the robustness and capabilities to cater to the most technical people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, yeah, God, a few years ago, obviously I'm based here in Stockholm. I actually remember someone on my team linking GPT Engineer, and I was just looking at it, I was like, I don't understand what this is. It's like completely over my head, like at the time. And then suddenly like Lovable was like exploded onto the scene. It was quite a remarkable transformation from like this sort of hard to understand product that my dev friends were pretty excited about to this sort of like thing that suddenly like everyone was like, wow, this is pretty.
I think that's one of the really essential things when you look at any hypergrowth company. Any that I've seen that have achieved anything remotely close to Lovable have all started with a niche product or a niche community, I should say, and then pivoted and created something that was available for everyone. But they started with a niche community before they do their official launch, right? Now, sure, Lovable was a rebrand, and it's a different product for sure, but they brought over an existing community that gave them a big head start compared to someone who was just launching off the bat. So I think it's a really important move if you want to achieve a large amount of growth in a very short period of time and try and drive that media story. Is that you should start with a community first before you launch a product.
Yeah, I think Greg Eisenberg talks about this with the ACP funnel now. He talks about this sort of like audience community product. So that's like a way to a new way to build a business, a product business in 2025. I think like exactly as you're describing, right? Like to figure out who is the audience for this and build a small community of people who are like very engaged in this topic, and then use their sort of collective understanding and also their patience, um, because to sort of help you shape your understanding. So like I talk a lot about building customer understanding, and when I work with people, that's usually done by like going and speaking to like their target customer. But what people often don't realize is that you can actually uh, build a customer understanding in multiple different ways. Going and betting yourself with the customer, which is also something that's becoming a big trend in the AI space with the sort of forward into the integrated engineers. I think Lovable's just sort of started hiring their first one. But you can also build a community, and that just it integrates you with these people who are going to like understand your product, and you get direct feedback on what you're doing. And if you can do that in a sort of fairly low stakes environment to begin with, it can be really impactful because, yeah, ultimately customers are less patient. They really don't have like, they expect things to work. They don't want to deal with like the warts of the product. And if you can build like an engaged community early on for a product, it can make a huge difference, because when you eventually lower the barrier of entry to that, you've already worked out a lot of the issues.
I also think that there's other elements where community is becoming more and more important today. Certainly in anything that's going to be AI based, the tools available to build something are just becoming easier and easier every day. So the barrier to entry is becoming lower and lower for people to build stuff that they might have sat on for years, or maybe they just see something, I see this app that has this really great feature. Why would I pay $60, a month subscription when I can just build it for $15, or whatever it costs, my percentage of a subscription on Lovable. So the barrier to building something is so low now that anyone can build anything. So I think when it comes to the importance of community, that's really your only defense at a certain point, right? Lovable is one of these companies that are going to be in this situation themselves, right? Where it's inevitable that some of that the LLMs that exist will create their own versions of Lovable. Google's already taken a shot at that. Fortunately, I guess for Lovable, it wasn't a great success at this point, but the others will join on that bandwagon, and community will be the only thing that stands up as a moat at that point. But
Yeah,
I
it's
think
like the
even
brand, right? Like it's back to branding. Like, why do people wear, Nike shoes or Adidas shoes? Why do people wear Converse? It's because of a brand. It it creates like a sense of belonging, and I think the community is an extension of that. Now that we have so many like online tools to collect people, you can sort of extend your brand into people's, to actually be part of people's lives, on a sort of fairly regular basis. They're like, this is a place not just a place they go to do work, it's also a place they socialize. It's a place they meet friends and maybe potential future founders and, collaborators. Like, I think that's like it's something that I think a lot of startups, particularly consumer facing, like B2C stuff, are really sleeping on at the moment, because I guess that's because it's a fairly large amount of work to do it.
there's a few parts to it. Yes, there's a large amount of work. You need to have resources there. You can't sort of automate it as such. I'm a big fan of using AI and automating conversations where you can. There's an element of community which requires that personal touch, and anyway, that's a part. You do have to put the resources there, and quite often, um, it's not always measurable. Now you can create some sort of attribution for your event, so you can work out maybe the value of a certain platform in a way, right? Long-term value of a customer on one platform versus another, and so on. But I don't think there's a great way of measuring the overall impact of what you do in community. I can do an event, I can have 100 people attend, I can work out 20 people signed up. But what you can't work out is the other 80 go and tell all their friends about how good this experience was, and that generated your new users, right? So I think not being able to measure something can be a bit difficult. And then there are things which won't deliver measurable impact, but you still want to do them. And that's sort of what part of community is creating a great experience for the people that are a part of that community. And sometimes that's just a cost. Sometimes it's a cost you bear. So yes, I think that's one of the reasons, particularly if you're dealing with a very product focused, engineering team that haven't worked in marketing or haven't worked in the community before. That can be a bit of a difficult hurdle in the early days of a startup. With that said, I do agree that there is certainly most startups shouldn't hire someone on day one to be in community. If you've had much experience in startups, you'll realize that during the early days, people just wear many hats, and it's not unsurprising that the person who's managing your data security might also be the person managing your community, right? Or something like that. Is certainly something you might have to put more resources. You probably put resources in as you scale up rather than from day one.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a really valid point for a lot of people who are building products today on the sort of idea of like intangible costs. I think something that people really struggle to get across or get their head around is this sort of like top of the funnel level activity that businesses need to do in today, like the modern day, in order to attract people. I talk a lot about like content marketing with people that I've worked with, and that like recommend founders do founder-led marketing or founder-led growth, and it's the same sort of deal, right? Like they're often sort of like resistant to it, or it's like, oh, but like doing that stuff takes so much time out of my day. There's more important things that I do, but like it's sort of like it builds momentum the more you do it. Like whether it's content, whether it's community, podcasts, like whatever it is you're out there talking about, it's almost impossible to measure because like, someone could see, something in the community or attend an event. And then like 6 months later, they're like, oh yeah, I went to the event and used this really cool product. And then suddenly that turns into like an enterprise contract because, or they see a post on LinkedIn and then they're like, what's that guy up to now? And suddenly it's like, they're in and they're back engaged. It's so hard to like track and measure that, especially for a startup, because the results that you're going to get and the outcomes you're going to get from that are going to be so sporadic. Like once you scale, like you can actually start measuring like, okay, well, we're spending this much and then on acquisition and this is how much between marketing and advertising and events and everything. And you can start quantifying it at scale. But like at the early stage, you kind of have to just like have a little bit of faith that it's going to pay off. And I also think it's important to do things that you kind of like doing. So if you don't like hanging out on Slack or Discord, starting a community is probably not the best thing for you.
Yeah.
But if you're like living on those platforms a lot, which a lot of people do these days, they spend a lot of time socializing on Discord and stuff, then maybe it is a great idea to use that type of thing, like to do that sort of thing, to lean into the stuff that like you actually enjoy doing.
I think the easiest win that any founder can do, so if you're a solo founder or if you're a team, whatever it is, to build a community, every product based startup should do this. You should have beta testers, right? That's a community on its own that you can start with, much lower effort, and you can know the value of that community, right? It surprises me how often people have spent, a year building something and they've never got one bit of user feedback on the product.
Yeah, tell me about it.
It's got to be one of the biggest reasons for the failures of startups around the world. People are too busy building something and they're not getting validation from users before they build it. Maybe they got some validation, but what they built wasn't consistent with what people wanted, and then they're stuck in the situation of thinking they've built something amazing and no one's telling them otherwise, right? Or they're not able to move fastly enough in an industry that's got a lot of attention. Vibe coding is a very easy example where you can bring that up, where there are thousands and thousands of vibe coding tools now, right? Every single week I work there, someone would message me, hey, I just built this new vibe coding tool with Lovable. I'm like, great. But yes, there's thousands of these new companies that are popping up in this space, and the only ones that are really exceeding, the ones that are being at the forefront of this revolution and releasing new features in competition with each other. You can look at Replit or Bolt or these other sort of quite similar tools that are doing pretty well. And if you look at Bolt and Lovable or Replit and Lovable or any of them, you see quite often that they're all releasing a very similar feature around the same time, almost often within days of each other. It's not so much about they know what each other are doing, it's that they both know, or they all know that to be the leader, they have to be the first to market with this feature. And that's because they're engaging with their users and actually have a large beta testing group of people who are asking for these features, so seeing the new ones and saying, you need to do this and this, this, this. So it's just very coincidental that they often fall within days of each other.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to a few people about this, so like, they're all just like doing the same thing, copying each other. But it is actually, as you say, like, with AI, like if you look at like OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, it's the same sort of rhythm, right? And it is literally because like the technology is progressing at a certain rate, and the capabilities of technology are progressing, and they're all speaking to and understanding their users, so they're matching up and they're coming up with similar concepts. Now, of course, there is also insiders, all of the different companies sharing what's happening with their competitors. But yeah, it is very much like you can see the rhythm, like that things are rhyming because they are so engaged with their customers. They're like, with all the command level interface stuff that's come out, you know, Odd was the first to market with that, or Anthropic was the first to market with that, but now sort of very quickly OpenAI and now Google are sort of like coming out with similar things. And like people are like, people tend to think that like it's just like, they're just spinning these things up quickly, but like, you can't dump out a product in 2 weeks at these types of businesses. Like it is just sort of like who's able to get over that finish line first. And that's really what's key with emerging markets, right? Or emerging technology, being like really on it about like what can we do and what do people want us to be able to do. And if you don't have like a really tight like hand on the sort of pulse of your customers and the people you want to work with, it's really difficult to actually to do that, to predict it. I often talk about this idea of like being overconfident. People are like, I've got so much conviction for this idea, and like I really believe in it, like, and it's so like personal to them, and like, but like, if you don't have evidence, and evidence is like pretty like clear, that's just it's just overconfidence. Like confidence is backed by real evidence, like real people saying like, I'll give you money for this, or real people saying like, yes, please let me use it, or let me tell my friends about this. That's evidence that gives you confidence to take bigger risks, make bigger investments. If you don't do that, then you're just being overconfident, and you're like, I'm just going to take $1 million of someone's money and just funnel this into a development team for 2 years and then hope for the best. That's a pretty risky strategy.
I think it's more than just overconfidence. So I've worked with a few founders. One really relevant example quite recently, where it's just a lack of knowledge and support, right? So they never intended to waste money or resources, but say that they wanted to build an app and they didn't know how, and they just searched, okay, I need to find a development agency and I need to get them to build my app for me. So I will spend, $10,000-$15,000 MVP, and now they want $100,000 to build out the app. And so people just get so committed from their lack of knowledge and lack of understanding of how to build, or how to launch a startup. So they just see that there's this large cost, and they've got the resources to say, and maybe they put their life savings into something. So I think people get committed to something too early. It's very interesting, the culture in SF compared to anywhere else in the world. If you go to SF and you meet startups or meet founders, and something doesn't work, okay, sure, I'll just try something else then, right? Like, I tried this idea, it didn't work, I pivoted to something else, it failed, I closed it, I started something else. That's sort of the mindset in SF. But you go anywhere else and I put my entire life work into this. There's emotional connection that builds very early on. I think the successful founders, or the founders that are certainly trying to be successful, that are in SF, or maybe there are other places in the world where the culture might be similar, but they disconnect emotionally from the product. It's not to say that they don't care or anything. It's just that if it fails, they're not going to give up their life, or they're not going to be down for months on end.
Yeah, it's a real societal thing. I find like Europe is really, really like European founders really have a hard time letting go. And I think a lot of it is like it's like wrapped up in like ego and expectation, like the amount of spin that people will put here on like a failed startup, like, oh, but you know, actually it wasn't a failure because of these things. And there's a lot of like, it becomes a little bit insincere. You know, founders that are shutting down companies saying that like they're really happy with the terms that they've settled it, and then they call themselves like an exited founder when they've just like wrapped up a company. And like it all becomes like quite insincere because there's a lot of like fragility in the sort of, people feel like they can't fail because it's going to be like they're going to be judged for it. And I've noticed that a lot with the sort of people I've met from the States, and particularly sort of Silicon Valley area. They just don't care. Like, you know, like you'll speak to them 1 month and then 3 months later be like, nah, fuck that idea. Like that was dog shit. This is the thing now. And they'll be all in on it. And then like 6 months later, they'll be on another thing. And then, you know, 24 months later, you'll be like, oh yeah, they've just raised a Series A for her, you know, like $5 million, and you can't get hold of them anymore.
Yeah.
And that's just
they were walking down the street and they tripped into the lap of some investor.
Yeah, but it's also the culture, right? Like they are very like you said, they're very unprecious about their ideas, and when they don't have evidence, when they don't have like confidence that this is going to pay off, they know when to like step away, and when to be stubborn.
It comes down to kind of what you touched on there, and I said about the excess of funds available, lots of investors available in SF, and it's not difficult there to get funding for many things. Even at the idea stage, people are getting funding. I have a friend who raised 5 million at an idea stage. I hadn't built anything at all. So it's just that there's more money available, and I think people know if something doesn't work out, they'll keep trying until something does. When you compare it to here in Australia, where getting investment at an idea stage is near impossible, you have to have built something, you have to have been generating revenue, you have to go hunting from one angel investor to another angel investor to sort of build up a team of people who would be willing to invest. It is quite a difficult process. It's a journey, and it's very rare that someone will have investment in less than 6 months. It is very rare here in Australia. So that whole thing is you have to put a lot more of your life into a startup to get it going. Yeah, and perhaps it's very similar in Europe.
Yeah, I would say it's similar. Like Europe doesn't have so much of an issue with the early stage stuff. It's more of a size issue where someone in SF might get, you know, $5 million dollars for like an early stage pre-market idea. Here you might get like 500K if you're lucky, probably less than that. And then you'll also be encouraged to go to San Francisco and to like, yeah, it's become more challenging over the last sort of 3 years. You know, if you go back to like 2019, 2020, 2021, when the interest rates were incredibly low, like it was super easy. You could almost trip up, like here in Stockholm, you could almost like walk down the street and like trip over a bag of money to invest in your startup. Like it was like ridiculously easy to get early stage funding, but it was still smaller. And a lot of startups found like they were giving away like pretty big chunks of their company to early stage investors who weren't really that engaged in making this startup a success. They were just sort of placing in many bets, and then they would struggle with future rounds because as you get past sort of angel and seed stage investment and start getting into more mature investment, those people can't step up, you know, so that's a big issue here.
You have to really be selective with your investors. That's another pitfall that people find themselves in. They go for where the money is, and it's the worst thing you can do. There's, as I said, well, if you're in the right place, there's endless money available. If you've got something that some investors are interested in, you've probably got something other investors are interested in. So I think you should always be really selective of who you have behind you. Obviously, Lovable is a great example of that. There are many people who want to get involved in Lovable. It's one of the most sought after investments, and anytime they've done a raise, almost within a month or two, people are predicting the value of double the valuation, and more investors want to get in. And there were some huge names that got turned down. household names that you would think, why wouldn't you want to have that person? And it's just because they didn't have a reputation of fighting for their investments, and that's sort of what you're looking for. You want people who either they're opening up doors that you couldn't open up yourself, or they're out there fighting for you in some way. So yes, there's a very select few people who are involved with Lovable, and I think that's what you should do for your team as well. Try to reduce the check size where possible as well, if you can. Um, Obviously, you want a few that are larger, but it'd be better for you to have a larger group of smaller investors, knowing that if you're playing a numbers game and the percentage of those investors who are going to do something for you will be greater if you have more investors involved.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that I really encourage people when like try and talk to founders about is like understanding if people who are giving you money today will be able to give you money tomorrow. So if you're stepping up into a bigger round, it's important that your investors are like willing to take that ride with you. So they're not just sort of like sitting on your cap table, sort of occupying space of an investor and like raising questions about like, well, why are they not interested in investing again? What's going on here? It's pretty common that you run into this, like when you see like early stage investors who've given money and they're just like completely disengaged from the running of the business. It raises a lot of questions for like sort of the next stage of funding of raising. So yeah, right investors is like a really critical like thing for founders and product to think about today.
I think some investors at seed stage who are probably not going to be people who reinvest, but certainly when you get to Series A and onwards, you're dealing with larger institutionalized investors, the Sequoias, the Excels, and so on of the world. That's where you're going to see some really the larger ongoing rounds.
Yeah,
quite often.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really interesting segue into sort of fundraising for like founders to think about. I want to circle a little bit back down to like what it was like at Lovable. I'm a bit curious, like what was it like actually being part of a company that grew so quickly? The rate of growth like just this year has been like ridiculous, fastest growing a startup like basically ever, right? Certainly here in Europe, I think ever. But how was that as an experience?
Sure. Look, when I first joined, it was the Wild West, as many startups are in their early stages. And that's the period I really enjoy with startups. When everyone is off being their own operator, they're doing their own thing. That's really probably what was a single biggest contributor to Lovable's growth in the early days. I mean, I mentioned about having a community and bringing that on board, but from an internal point of the company, the defining culture and value that made them grow to where they did was a culture of everyone can essentially do their own thing. But the motto was that you had to only convince one other person that it was a good idea for you to run with whatever you wanted to do, right? Very easy to convince one person of anything. But yes, I never heard of an idea that was so bad that every person who was asked said no. But yes, in the early days when I first got there, everyone was doing their own thing and achieving great outcomes. Everyone was doing what they wanted to do. No one had bosses. It was a flat organization. But obviously, at a certain point, when you grow at a certain point, you have to create a structure, and that has its challenges with it. There's growing pains, and there are some people who are only in it for that early ride and don't want to be a part of a larger scale up as well. So there was definitely a rapid transition there that you would normally see happen over many years. When you add another element to that is quite often when people are in this startup journey and for something that does grow into a larger entity, you learn and develop skills over that time. People that might have started off as a engineering intern over 10 years might become head of engineering or something like that, right? Where they've developed skills that are more consistent with a larger organization, or they're a VP or something where they've had to enhance their business acumen and so on. People didn't have the time to do that in Lovable, right? So it was definitely sort of a make or break where you had to. It wasn't a bad culture. It wasn't a toxic culture, or it wasn't people being let go or anything like that. It was just everything was compressed into a much shorter time frame than you would find elsewhere. But the actual culture was actually really positive. It was my first time working with the Swedish culture, which has its own uniqueness. The whole Nordic region does, but I think Sweden specifically is a bit of a standout. They take moderation to the extreme. So yes, it was a bit of a learning curve in that way, but certainly full of positivity. I really enjoyed my time there. I worked remotely, so I worked from Australia. So as I said, when I first started, I was working by 9 to 5 and Lovable. Later on, just Lovable. But my day was, waking up at 3 or 4 in the afternoon and working through the night, going to sleep at 8 in the morning. So I certainly had a quite unique experience that would not be consistent with everyone else at Lovable. Work and life balance is very important to the Swedish people, and certainly 97% of Lovable is based in Sweden.
Yeah.
There's
It's an
definitely
incredibly
a check
important.
out time.
Yeah, I think it's a big difference. It's actually like a bit of a culture shock, or it was a bit of a culture shock for me. So I moved here from London 7, 8 years ago, and it took me probably about like half a decade to like really adjust to the fact that like 3, 4 o'clock, the office starts to empty out. By 5 o'clock, it's empty. And
Yeah,
then, there are a lot of people who still, they're available in the evening if you need to contact them, and like they might sit back down on the computer to pick up emails and stuff like that. But there's also a lot of people who just don't, that they're, and they're, and, in a lot of countries, those people would be like considered like, or they're not working hard enough, or they're not engaged. And it's just not, it doesn't really register on that level here in Sweden.
I think it's a very relevant thing to talk about. There's all this talk about 9 to 6. Working 9 till 9, 6 days a week, and there's very few companies I've heard of that are actually, say, enforcing that for all staff, right? I don't think that's what the 996 is really about in terms of the startup world. I think it's more that people should be willing to do it. That's the way it certainly is in the US and most other places around the world. There's definitely not that motto or mindset promoted in Lovable at all, or any Swedish company I've seen. The flip side to that is there's never been a $1 billion company ever in the history of the world that didn't have people who were willing to do that, right? The fact is that you need people that are willing to do those hours. If I'm in Australia, I've got to talk to people that are in SF and Sweden, in Stockholm at the same time. There's only like 3 hours of the day where you can sort of get even SF and Stockholm sort of matched up, right? So that means that I'm going to have to be awake between 3 to 6 in the morning here in Australia. Now, again, most companies aren't doing those 3 different time zones, but not having a service window of that. But there's going to be exceptions where it just has to be done. There are going to be times when you have an incident, an emergency incident with your data or some sort of security breach or something like this, where you need people up at 2 in the morning to be fixing this. So yes, Swedish people in general, almost all of them are very work-life balance. Check out at 5. I'm done. I've done my duty. But there might be, I would say, like a 5% who are just going to be working 2 to 3 in the morning.
Yeah,
I knew when I visited Stockholm, actually, that when I couldn't sleep and it was 3 in the morning, I knew if I went into the office, there would be people there. And there was, right? There's no expectation that they are. They just want to be. Maybe it was only 3 or 4 people, but
I think if you've got a company that people are like really engaged in, you are going to get those types of people. I think when it falls apart, particularly here in Europe, when the wheels start to come off, is when you start trying to mandate that in order to extract more from people. I think in the States, sometimes you can you can make those pushes, particularly in times where people are afraid of the consequences of not working harder. Like right now, for example, when there's so many larger companies churning out engineers and product managers and stuff into the market, I think that there's this concept of like a job seekers market or an employer's market. And when there's an employer's market, you usually see much more of this talk about like, oh, people need to work harder and they need to, they need to be willing to be here 12 hours a day because that's what it takes to be successful. But then you get companies that are like popping up where all like that, like Lovable, that are proving that you can build like a very successful company in one of the most sort of like work-life balance focused cities in the world, and it still can be incredibly fast growing. And even in that situation, like there's still, like you said, many people here in Sweden who are very focused on their work, and it's just fine. They've got to find the right company to do it for. Otherwise, they aren't going to go home. Like if they don't care about the work that they're doing, they're going to leave at 4 o'clock. They're going to go home. They're going to be with their family. They're not going to think about work.
It's such an interesting culture.
Yeah,
It is really a place of its own. You don't see that sort of mindset in the rest of the world. Money is not a motivator for people in Stockholm, which uh, is interesting because it's an expensive city to live in, right? Crazily expensive, but um, the wages in Sweden as a whole, but even in Stockholm, which is the most expensive part, um, are not competitive with, say, the US in any way, even though the taxes are significantly higher in Sweden. It's not a political conversation, it's more of a money just doesn't seem to motivate people. And I remember there were some situations where it was proposed that people might be paid more, and they said, "Well, why?" I'm not worried about if I'm getting paid less to work at Lovable. It's the place to be, or it's part of something that's generational, a once in a lifetime opportunity. But I think that's how they view work in general. It's not just whether it's lovable. It's more of um, does this work provide a value to me, and does it align with my values as a human? Is much more important than a salary. Completely the opposite of anywhere else in the world, right?
yeah. I think that's a largely factor of the security that you have in this in Sweden. So I think I have a theory. Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. So I have a theory that the reason that like Scandinavia is so well known for its innovation, or the Nordics in general are so well known for innovation, is because pretty much every Nordic country, innovation comes from the top of the pyramid. It's come from like self actualization. People need to work, like people need jobs, they need to work, but most people would be comfortable for 2 or 3 years if their job suddenly was to be disrupted, or they wouldn't be in immediate danger of like being homeless or within like 2 or 3 months. There are many people in that situation. I don't want to say like everyone's super comfortable here, but a lot of people are in a situation where they feel very secure, and that allows you like all their needs are covered. And that allows them to move into this sort of like mode of like self actualization, like, oh, I'm going to quit my job and do a startup, or I'm going to move out of corporate and join a fast growing startup for half the pay, and we'll just see what happens. And it's a different type of risk taking to like the States, where like the States, it's like you're on your own. If you don't succeed, like it's like base level, like even that nobody's going to come help you if things don't work out for you. So I think like the drive comes from a very different place. It comes from like the bottom of the pyramid, almost like I need to succeed in order to have the type of life that I want. And I think like the Nordics have like a very different take on that. That's why we get things like IKEA, where like it's just amazing, like very unique, amazing companies that come out of this sort of area as a result.
I think we're basically doing the Swedish tourism agency's job for them at this point.
Absolutely.
I really recommend people do go check out Sweden and Stockholm. It's a beautiful place, beautiful people. But yes, just the cultural differences are very interesting. There are other things that come into that. I'm obsessed with the word lagom, and for those that don't know, it means not too much, not too little, just a real balance. But like the history of where the word came from, going back to Nordic wars, where people would attain too much power, and that was how that can be so fundamentally impactful on the culture of now people don't want to be seen as having too much power. They don't want to be seen as having too much wealth. And you don't see Ferraris and Lamborghinis driving down the streets of Stockholm, right? It's billion-dollar business owners in Volvos.
Yep. Like you brush shoulders with, like I've worked with people for years, not realizing like how wealthy they actually were. And, like just because they live such um, fairly sort of like standard lives, if you want to call it that. Like and then you like realize like, oh, they live in a huge apartment in the center of the city, and it's like, okay, so like they've clearly got like quite a lot of money, but you wouldn't know it. Like it's not as in your face as sort of, if you meet someone with a lot of money in London, like you almost immediately know that they have a lot of money. And it's the same in the States, right? Like if you like, people who are doing well and people who are struggling because, in San Francisco, they drive a Cybertruck or something like that, and then like you just immediately sort of know this. They have.
Does that mean they're struggling, or does that mean they're doing well? I'm not quite sure.
Well, right now it might mean they're struggling,
Yeah.
but like they have like the status symbols is what I mean.
Of course.
Whereas like there's a lot less of that around Scandinavia, as far as I've been able to tell.
As well, no one talks about their income. I think I've caught people off guard quite a lot being so open. Australians are usually quite loud and just tell everyone their secrets and don't trust us. But, they were caught off guard when I was talking about like my salary, and it's not something that's very common there. The flip side to that, again, is you can see everyone's tax record. It's just publicly available. You can search up someone's name and work. You can see how much they earn, which is something you don't have anywhere else in the world. That transparency exists. So if I wanted to, I could find out someone's salary, but they wouldn't tell me it if I asked them.
Yeah, it's a little bit private information, but not really, because you can just check.
Yeah.
But it is definitely interesting how much how different it is. I think like it took me a few years to really adjust to it, to get used to it, and now I think as a city, it's probably like there's like Stockholm, Amsterdam, London, Berlin a little bit. Europe's had this kind of startup winter for like since like 2022. A lot of startups went out of business. A lot of founders sort of threw in the towel. This is the first time in like this year is like the first time that I've really felt like back end of this year, particularly, where I've seen like a lot of shoots of like the first signs of like that of spring coming up with like new companies, a lot more of like early stage investment happening. It's a pretty interesting time, and you see that Stockholm, Amsterdam, a little bit in Berlin, and then quite a bit in London, though London's slower than you would expect for such a large city.
I think there's a couple others to also consider. Barcelona is doing pretty well. It's coming up along really well. Certainly Switzerland as a whole, but Zurich, really, again, another city it's starting to get really exciting in. But yeah, Stockholm still leads the charge on the excitement factor at the moment, particularly in AI. They're still producing more unicorn companies in Stockholm than anywhere else per capita. But yes, Europe is on the brink of positioning itself to be the leader. There's a few elements that go into that. There's the Silicon Valhalla of Stockholm that everyone's talking about. Interested to see if Stockholm does take over. In that case, take over as a talent destination is what I'm talking about, right? So SF is still the number one place that people around the world travel to get involved in tech. Where they're the most talented people are still going to SF, but that is changing, and Stockholm is certainly the runner up at the moment. And there's a few things that are going into that, but really it's pride, right? Like there's people who are really proud that they're European based and that they're fighting the fight for Europe. You could look at Project Europe, which is, how would you say, sort of a network and community of founders that are promoting this culture and mindset of Europe being first in tech. And it's backed by some wonderful people. Anton from Lovable is involved. Harry Stebbings from 20 VC is involved. But yes, there's certainly a race, if you will, for Europe to become that leader. I think you'll probably see, although there's Mistral, which is a LLM that's European based, I think you'll see more European infrastructure start to pop up. I think it's likely that you'll see another LLM competitor in that space that's European based.
Absolutely.
It might be sort of the only defense mechanism against LLMs, right? There are, as I said, Anthropic and OpenAI and Google are all doing their own versions of Lovable, and they'll do their own versions of other AI-based apps that are out there. They'll let the market test itself and work out the mistakes others have made, and they'll launch their own version, trying to cut people out of the market. And I think when that happens, the companies that are either getting cut out will have to look at other models, and that might mean that they look at European models. That is the long-term goal, I think.
It's interesting. Like, I also believe that we're going to see like a surge of like European focus on LLMs. In 2026, there's actually a few different laws coming into place for like a geo-partitioning of data. So it's pretty likely that it seems that it's going to become much in the same way that GDPR, like partitions all European data has to be handled in Europe and European servers, that's going to get even more national. So you won't be able, I think France is the first one to implement this. So you won't be able to like actually port European French user data out of France anymore. So like from an LLM perspective, like, or from like Mistral's going to be like the only model that it can work by default in France. I think we're going to see like more of that happening because like Europe's like the leader in regulation, right? And a lot of people are like, that makes a lot of people very bearish in Europe, on Europe. But I think that it also creates like a fair amount of opportunity for companies here to actually monopolize on that regulation.
Yeah, definitely. It promotes local startups. It's interesting to see which countries that some of the larger models might consider setting up a local operation in. Is France worth it? Is the UK worth it? Whatever it is. And I think that there'll be somewhere it'll be yes and somewhere it'll be no if that's the situation they're put in where they have to choose whether they're going to have a local operation there or not.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting time, and I think it'll continue to be. It'll be interesting to see how Europe develops. I mean, Europe's very good at early stage innovation. I think its late stage is still going to be dominated by the US because there's just so much more late stage funding out there. You can't, like I think recently I saw that like the 20 most valuable companies in Europe are worth one apple. So like the capital that flows out in late stage companies is just obscene in America. But early stage, like there's huge amounts of money, like relatively huge amounts of money flowing around, more than enough to start a company if you want funding. Or
you also have to think about the addressable market, right? If you compare the total US population to whatever the parts of Europe that you're interested in, if you want to operate in those parts of Europe, you're still having to navigate multiple cultures and languages, and that has its own hurdles, right? You're having to set up teams that are speaking multiple languages, or teams that are based in each of these individual countries. The US is just one large uniform, mostly population. It's just a much easier target audience to address.
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that every single Swedish unicorn, or like the majority of Swedish unicorns, have all founded as like focused on being English speaking companies. They've focused on international talent, not exclusively, but like they immediately sort of like realized that like hey, running our company in Swedish makes us a like local company running in English, given that our English is perfect. Like the English of these Swedish people is perfect.
It is beyond perfect.
It's ridiculous, and they're all many of them are very self-conscious about it. Don't know why.
If you go anywhere else in the world, you other multiple English-speaking countries, quite often when they switch between their language and English, there's pause. It's just a moment, a facial expression or something. The Swedish don't have that. They could go one word back and forth, no change at all.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's very impressive to me how I've been trying to learn Swedish for like 7 years and I still struggle. Mostly because everyone will just talk English to me. But it's crazy. But I think one of the things that I really like you really see is that like companies that like focus on being the startups and the early stage products that are like, no, this is an international product. This is for international speakers. They just make it simpler for themselves because if you roll out in Swedish and you get a bunch of Swedish customers, then all your support staff has to speak Swedish. All of like, and then like even if you go to English, you still have to support that relatively small addressable market long term. You also become like some of the startups that I've worked with over the years here, like they sort of settle into being like Swedish companies, like Swedish speaking companies. So like there's a little bit of like it becomes like not so inclusive for English speakers, and they feel like they're an inconvenience to like people like sigh when they have to do meetings in English and stuff like that. And so I think it's like pretty important early on to set that, if you want to be an international company, to set that expectation that like, hey, this is an international company. We want to fish from the very large international talent pool, not this very small Swedish talent pool. And hey, if you want to have Swedish English as a requirement, do it.
It's very interesting because the talent in Sweden is just amazing, right? There's absolutely amazing talent there, both technically and non-technically. But I think there's the future of talent in startups is different as well, right? It's no longer about who is the most technical, because the tools are now so advanced that technicality is becoming less relevant. You'll see any of the really high growing startups now are hiring people based on, I don't say entirely based on an audience, but the fact that they've got some sort of audience behind them, right? And there's more time spent on building in public and sharing the story of building a company now. You look at Lovable as an example, right? So you've got Felix Haas as one of the design team there. I don't know the numbers. I think, forgive me, Felix, it's got to be at least 60,000 followers or so, something around that range, right? Elena Werner for growth. There's people that are being chosen who are talented. There's no doubt about it. But they come with an audience. They come with a package deal, if you will. And you're seeing that in smaller, early stage startups now as well, where the whole team is made up of people who have some sort of influencer status.
Yeah. I mean, it is exactly that. A funnel we talked about earlier, right? The audience community product. And by collecting like a team of people who are active on whatever platform they're active on, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, X, Substack is another big one. You can quite quickly funnel people into specific communities that are more targeted. You can start to, at least in my experience, people from their following that are not suited for that community, they'll just filter out. So the people who from Felix's or Elena's communities that are not that interested in like AI builders, they're not going to hang around in Lovable's community, but there's going to be a big crossover of people in those communities. And by bringing people in who are just like engaged in building an audience, like you can sort of like pull in like a fairly like a decent size chunk of like people and engagement. And it's like a reciprocal relationship between the company and the person as well, because they like the nice thing about audiences is that you carry an audience with you. They are your audience. So if you want to spin out later and start your own company or monetize your audience somehow or build your own community, it becomes much easier to do that if you're doing that while you're working at a company or building a company. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting dynamic that's developing. We're seeing a lot of other like larger influencers pairing up with others to build things. Like recently saw a few people who launched a very interesting product called Clio, for example, and that's like Lara Costa, Jake Ward. They're like 100K plus on LinkedIn, and they just built a LinkedIn writing assistant basically.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You see, you see these videos on YouTube of people who are like, I wanted to test this business idea, so I launched X, and in 48 hours I had $10,000 of sales. It was like, you don't mention that the only reason that happens is you've got this large audience, right? So
yeah, definitely. Like there's a little bit of a movie magic going on there, right?
Yeah.
It's like I worked for 10 years building this like massive audience, and then in 2 days I was able to launch a product that immediately went to like $20,000.
Yeah. The great example with Lovable, is a Brazilian company. I love what they do. I'm a big fan of the founder. They're a ed tech platform, but they have 600,000 customers, right? And they built a new platform using Lovable, and they sell courses as a platform, right? So like they'll build out a platform on how to be a police officer or something like this, right? But the punchline is, we made $3 million in 48 hours. Like, yeah, but you've got 600,000 paying subscribers already. There's that part that's missing. But no, it's still a great story. It's still a great story. There's still something amazing that was achieved with Lovable. As I said, they're a great platform. They're doing amazing work for Brazil as a country by enabling these great educational courses. So I'm a big fan of theirs specifically. And very shortly after that post, when we talk about influencers and large followings, the Brazilian community sort of bee swarm and get behind things with excitement that you'll never see anywhere else in the world, right? If you ever search through all Brazilian profiles, everyone's just got thousands of followers. Like it's not normal that someone who is a cleaner at a company has less than 2,000 followers, right? But They are all very vocal, all very engaged, and for like a month straight or 2 months straight after that post, every day it's like 50 to 100 people from Brazil are adding me and so on. They've got a very interesting ecosystem. I know we've gone from being the Swedish tourism agency to the Brazilian now, right?
Yeah, exactly. Need to look for some sponsorships.
Yeah, they've got a very interesting ecosystem of people who are very passionate about technology there and a determination to make something of it, right? Um, they've always had a bit of a challenging economy, so they use technology in a much better way. And what I've noticed is that the prompting quality was much better coming out of Brazil than almost anywhere else in the world.
Well, that's interesting.
They just learned to be more efficient with the product.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, anyway, that
No,
that
it's
story. I could talk about Brazil for a while as well.
maybe we'll have to do a follow-up episode talk where we promote Brazil. That would be an interesting to hear about takes on other countries for sure. Talked a lot about Lovable. We talked a lot about Stockholm. I want to hear though a little bit now about like what you're up to now. What's next? Like what are you doing at the minute? Yeah, like what are you excited about right now?
Yeah, sure. Post Lovable, I've been moving into doing some advisory work. So prior to Lovable, I mentioned I'd done a lot of government work, project analyst, those types of roles. But I'd also been an advisor for marketing with small medium businesses, mostly hospitality and retail. That's sort of my background on the business sense. But yeah, now I'm taking the skills I've learned from my time at Lovable to be an advisor, mostly in AI consumer products, on how to build communities, how to grow. One of the things, obviously, with Lovable, that they've got the resources to have some of the best talent in the world, and um, there's just some amazing things that you would only be able to learn from being in the right place at the right time. So there's a few different companies that I'm working with, some that are also in the vibe coding space. But yes, there's a few that really interest me. I'm trying to think, what's the most exciting thing I'm doing right now? There's one company I think is really interesting that I'm working with who are building a subscription-based accommodation provider. So it's more for nomads in, say, Southeast Asia, right? If you go there and you're moving around quite a bit, you have to get involved in these local Facebook groups. You have to sort of negotiate back and forth with people, and there are some sort of tourist traps, if you will, in that space. But in the end, you're having to sign up and learn this over and over wherever you go. But yes, this is an interesting thing for me, where I think you'd have a subscription and there'd just be a set group of houses in different locations that you could go to at any time, just as a subscription model. It's something that's really interesting if you're someone who's working remotely and just traveling while you're working.
Okay, cool. How has it been to sort of switch out of that hyper growth mode and work with companies that have, maybe a slightly different growth trajectory? How's that? Has there been a bit of a system shock for you? Has it been a nice change of pace? Like, how's it feeling?
It's good to have some sleep. So certainly at its peak for me, there were times where I was sleeping 1 or 2 hours every 2 or 3 days, right? That's not something everyone should do. It's not what's expected. It's just what I did to achieve what I needed to achieve. That's sort of, it's not sustainable. It's just, there are times when the world demands more of you, times when you should walk and times when you should run. And that was sprinting for my life. But anyway, it's good to take a bit of a step back and focus on what's important and try to look after my health. That's really something that you can let go of in the tech world. People experience negative health impacts from working too hard or being, putting too much energy into things. It doesn't have to be time consumption. It should just be the amount of energy you're putting towards something. And that can create all sorts of issues. You hear about things like imposter syndrome or burnout and those sorts of things. So yeah, it's good to take a bit of a slower pace now, but I'm spreading myself out quite thinly over a larger number of startups. I'm looking for things. Unfortunately, I'm in a position where I can focus on things that excite me as well, right? So I can focus on the things that they might not be paying well or they might not pay at all. It doesn't matter. I can be sort of motivated by what makes me happy at this point.
Yeah. That makes sense. I think it's an important note as well, as we're getting towards the end of this, is the health thing. I think, even now you're saying you're spreading yourself thin, like it's really easy just to like make unhealthy lifestyle your norm. And I'm speaking from experience here. Like a few years ago, I had some health complications after 10 years of pushing myself to throughout my career with my business. And it really does put things into perspective. Like, thankfully, I'm in a much better place now, but it's very easy to like. It can be very easy to make the justifications to yourself, right? Like, oh, it's okay to do this. It's okay for me to sort of be stretching myself thin, and like, I'll just rest soon. I'll just rest soon. It'll help soon. And then suddenly, like, if you're not careful, like that, the long term of that is that you never fully rest and recover, and you start, your body starts to fight back. I was able to push until I was like 30, 35 basically. And then my body was first like, nope, you need to stop now. You need to slow down. And like, so I take my health like much more seriously now.
It's really important you listen to your body. We've kept this sort of conversation very above board and straight and narrow, but I'm someone who sort of shares too much. And during my younger years, I absolutely abused my body and found out the limits of what the body can handle. Your body gives you signs. It tells you when things aren't working for it. And you can either choose to listen to them or choose to push past them.
Yeah, exactly. For me, personally, I was having like persistent headaches, and I would just take painkillers, or I would just go lie down for 30 minutes. And I was working like 12, 14-hour days. And I had these persistent headaches for like, 8, 9 months. Every few days, it would just be like new migraines, new headaches, and didn't get it checked out. And then one day, hospital, super high blood pressure, and not fun at all. Yeah, it's just, like it's, as you said, listening to your body, moving your body. Really, I think it's you can exchange some vitality for, progress in the short term, but like the longer you drift from doing that, like from proper eating properly, working out, sleeping properly, those sorts of things, the more you end up putting yourself into the red zone, right? Like, it's like you constantly drive a car at the red line and like revving it at the red line. Eventually, you're going to fuck your engine, and like there's no coming back from that.
I think that's one of the benefits of things when you look at like fasting, right? A lot of people are thinking, oh, it's to lose weight or something like that. It's not. It's not. It's actually about giving your body a rest and a reset where you're not just constantly consuming and putting stuff in. So I think when I talk about warning signs, I think the gut is probably the first one that you will notice. If you're feeling like you're getting your indigestion all the time, but whenever you're not sleeping, there's probably a sign that not sleeping is probably a big impactor, right? Yeah. Anyway, there are endless warning signs. We're not doctors. This isn't official medical advice.
This is not health advice, but go speak to your doctor if you're not feeling good right now.
Yeah, yes. By doctor, they don't mean someone who works at your startup.
No, exactly. Like, definitely be careful with those guys. But hey, Brenton, this has been a really interesting conversation. I'd love to check in with you in sometime next year and see what's new. Anything you want to shout out or anything you want to promote before we wrap up?
No, look, we didn't get to dwell on one thing that probably people really want to hear. I'll just be very quick.
Thanks.
Number one question I get asked, I think, after my time at Lovable is, how did you grow community? What makes community work? There are really only 3 key points you really need to know. Touched on one, which was identity. People have to have a sense of belonging. They have to feel a brand affiliation with the community. If it's, Nike, as you mentioned, people have this obsession with, I'm a Nike person, right? Or if it's, as I said, a football club, that's my hometown, that's my people. I identify with that. They've got to have identity is number one. The second part that's most important about a community is that it runs itself without you, right? If they're dependent on you to be there, it's not a community, it's a following, it's an audience, as you said. It's people who are hanging on the edge waiting for your next thing that you say. Not to say community shouldn't have a front or a lead person that's managing it. It's that if that person disappeared, the community would continue to run without them. And that's really essential, particularly with startups who are low on resources. They can't have someone spending 8 hours in a Discord every day, all right? Those two are the first 2 things you have to tick off. And assuming that they are ticked off perfectly, it results in the third thing that matters, which is engagement, right? If people identify with the community and they can run it without you, they will just engage with each other and it will run itself. It will take its own course as it needs to. The asterisk to the engagement part is you still have to show up. There still has to be, if you're a product-based community I'm talking about, if you're a startup based community, then they still need someone from the company to show up and be engaging with them. But certainly the first 2 points should equal the engagement. That's how I view the important or the necessary steps for building a successful community.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious, like, because I think a big part, of the community is like parasocial relationships with people in the company, right? Like like that last point of it being engaged with it. I think how much of a differentiator is that with like a Lovable? Like, how much does Anton still like get into? I know he's all over LinkedIn, like, which is like a big differentiator, I think, from a lot of founders. But yeah, like, how much is he still in the mix there?
Very interesting. People would love to hear from the product team or the community team or whatever, but not nearly as much as they want to hear from the founder, from Anton, right? And Fabian as well, please, people don't forget co-founders. All the co-founders out in the world are just going, yes, thank you, thank you. But no, people really want to hear from the founders, right? Anton is someone who is active on socials, not so much on Discord or on X or those sorts of platforms. I think because he's the busiest, most wanted person on the planet. Everyone's trying to get a piece of him. He rarely gets time to actually look at his own phone. There's just too many things that are going on. But I will tell you an insider tip, I guess. He loves Reddit. And this is something you won't see from a founder, I think, from a serious company anywhere else in the world. If he's posting on Reddit, it's him posting himself. Right? Any of the larger companies usually have teams of marketing people that are helping, with LinkedIn posts and comments here and those sorts of things. But the Reddit is 100% just Anton. So if you see him out there responding to some user feedback, it's because he really just enjoys it and wants to engage with users.
It's really cool.
He's a really down to earth person who, I mean, his ideal world, I think, would be him sitting on a hill with a salad and his wife. That would make him the happiest person on the planet, right? He just happens to also be the leader of a tech company, but I think that's more of his side gig, right? His main priority in life is just being a friendly person and someone that you could really relate to.
It certainly comes across in how his attention on like his content on LinkedIn. But yeah, really appreciate you sort of circling us back to those last points. I think they're really helpful to remind people or to tell people like what they can do in order to build a successful community for their product. I think it's only going to become a bigger trend, particularly as we get, I think, younger founders. I think more than in my generation, millennials, it was a much smaller subset of us, like the nerds, the geeks, that were like chronically online,
Mhm.
hanging out in online forums and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I think with Gen Z and earlier, like that's just their default. They want to find community. And as they become bigger consumers, as they become founders, I think it's going to become a much more normalized for businesses to just run communities alongside.
I think the part of what I said that would be difficult for people that are getting into it is the identity part, right? That's that first important hurdle you got to get over. It can't just be my brand's called Wovovo and they love Wovovo. There's got to be something more to it than that. There's got to be something that makes them decide, I want to wake up today and wear a shirt that says X. When people ask me what my hobby is, my hobby and who I define myself as a person is X, right? You saw this very successfully with some clubs that were like private access and VIP to be a member and those sorts of things that you can do to make people feel a sense of belonging to something that makes them unique. Yes, there's a whole deep dive you can do on that. Yeah, I appreciate your time, David. And
yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. Really,
of course,
really interesting conversation. I really hope we can pick up again sometime next year and hear about all the interesting communities you've been part of building
let's
again
do
and
it.
get even
Let's
more
do it. I'd
tips.
love to.
But yeah, thanks so much for taking the time. If you made it this far in the video, if you're watching this, do the YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, and see you in the next one.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.